Hey guys, Thomas the Sully Jr. here, aka Mustached. I'm here to finally review the movie Hereditary. Now, before I review this movie, I had seen other reviews of this movie, that is after watching the movie, of course, and I had heard all the hype the praise that this movie was getting, and after watching those reviews, I couldn't quite understand why this movie was getting as much as praise as it was getting. I've seen the reviewers say that the initial reviews were super great, and then they went to go see it being skeptical, and then they ended up praising it themselves. And here I am watching the movie, and then watching the reviews and thinking, it wasn't that great. It was actually kind of So here we go. We're going to do a little bit of a recap review, and in bits and pieces here and there, I'm going to tell you why I didn't think it was as good as people were saying. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the movie starts out great, but then things happen. But anyways, we do start with a pretty great shot, and I will agree with that, with this house, and we sort of zoom in into this mini house, which then is occupied by our little family, in which we see a father and a boy named Peter, who eventually goes up to his sister's room or something along those lines. And we also see the mother, Annie. So we see that the sister's like drawing stuff. It's something that's typical in the horror movie genre, I suppose. And the husband goes up to the mother, who's doing these little miniatures of what she's doing. But afterwards, they go to the mother's mother, the grandmother, essentially, her funeral. And we get some exposition about how the daughter thought that, she says that the grandma wanted her to be a boy, and that she's like worried about what's gonna happen if something happens to the mother as well. But afterwards, she like ensures her a little bit, and then goes to look at some boxes, reads like a little note. Anyways, we see that the daughter is like at school, and then something hits up against, I think it was like a bird hits up against the wall, and later on she looks at a pair of scissors. Meanwhile, Peter is distracted at school, trying to do his stuff. And then we cut back to the daughter, who then proceeds to kill the bird and then eat its head. And then we see someone watching her from at a distance, and I don't think the movie actually ever addresses who this individual is. Although I think I know who it is, I don't think the movie ever confirms who it actually is. Anyways, so the mother and the father talk about their grandmother's thing being like desecrated or something, her grave or whatever. Then the mother goes to this like meeting where the specific group talks about their loss. And this is where we do get to see the actress who plays Annie do shine, as she talks about how she had to deal with this loss and how it was essentially affecting her. So she did place the blame on herself, and she doesn't even really understand why she has done that. So the daughter sees some more art stuff, and then we see this little blue flash zip across the room and head out the window. And she's trying to look for what it is. So the mother gets a call, and the daughter heads outside, and it cuts away again. I will say the transitions in this movie do get worse and worse as the movie goes on. So Peter wants to go to a party, but the mother's like, I don't know. But she eventually insists, after getting the sister back, who is named, because I finally wrote it in my notes, Charlie. She sees it in her note. She sees that, she gets her back, and then she's like, wants her to go to this little party after she does this little clicking noise with her mouth. And her character isn't much more well defined. In fact, I do believe that the only character that we really do get to know is the mother all that well. So anyways, she does that noise some more as they're in the car. And we cut to the party scene where Peter's checking out some girl. We cut to then a woman in white staring in the thing, and we see that the mother, I believe this is the mother making another miniature or something. Anyway. So Peter prompts Charlie to partake in some cake while he goes to do some weed. So she does. She goes to get a drink, and then she does that. Sees him smoking, and then she starts like choking out. So Peter takes her into the car and speeds down the highway. It is here where there's something in the middle of the road. So he swerves out of the way, and at this point, Charlie had already opened the window and had her head out to attempt to breathe better. And as he was driving really fast, her head hits a pole. And for what it's worth, again, the movie does have a really good scene where Peter, the actor who does him, does a really good quiet moment. It's pretty rare to see in movies, and I think this is a really nice moment of just absorbing what just happened. But it also is at this point where this movie does, for me, dip in its biggest amount of quality. So he returns home, and he eventually goes to bed, and then starts to hear the crying from the mother. We see that her head obviously was cut off. And then there are a large amount of bugs covering it up. So they have another funeral, and Peter hangs back as the grieving takes place this time around, feeling more responsible for this one, of course, because he was the one driving. So anyways, Peter can now, while at school, only think about that, and he starts to feel chest pains, and he cries out a bit. And he arrives home via getting a ride. And again, we get some more odd transitions as the movie progresses. So it is at this point that the mother Annie gets checked in by this new character named Joan. And she mentions how she had lost children and talks about a way to possibly communicate with the dead once again. So, naturally, Annie is a bit skeptical, but, she does her little thing. Anyways, so now Peter's the one getting up after getting this little flash or whatever it is, and meanwhile, Annie's going back to work on another little miniature. She drops some paint and picks up this note. I'm not really sure what the note was for, but whatever. So afterwards, Annie finally decides to talk to Joan at her place about the stuff. And she's asking about Peter, that being Joan, that is. Annie mentions how she sleepwalks. And how she had this incident where she almost burned him alive. So, afterwards, she does eventually come back, and the father checks in on one of the miniatures that she had done of the accident. So, after their little thing, they go to the downstairs, where the mother and the son, Peter and Annie, finally get into this argument about the responsible party in this, and he after, like, she just yells and yells at him, he kind of tries to at least to come back with, you know, you decided to let her go to this party at first and foremost. Even though I don't think that is the best comeback after all, but whatever. So the father stops it, you know, he says enough of that. So the mother goes to get more supplies and then runs into Joan again. And this time, Joan mentions a seance. And this is where the movie completely falls apart. So Joan invites her to her place. She calls out to her grandson. Annie checks under the table to see nothing there. She sees the chalk starts to move on its own, writing stuff. It becomes a very supernatural movie at this point. So, that happens. Gives Annie the info, and then the mother hears a loud click as she starts to head home. Then she sees a bunch of ants in her room coming in. I assume that some of these things that she is seeing are not real, but I don't think the movie does the best job of trying to show us what's real and what's fake, and that, I think some of that is due to the bad transitions that I mentioned. But yeah, she does snap out of this one, and that was one of the better handled ones at the very most. And she mentions how she's back to going to sleepwalking. And then she sort of just spouts out that she never wanted to have Peter in the first place. And then it ends up being a double dream, which that was what made it really confusing. So she's trying to get Peter to apologize to Peter, and then wakes up the husband, Steve, and he's like asking about the questions as she's trying to perform the seance herself, and she's just begging for him to be open about this. Calls out the Charlie, and the little glass starts to move. The Peter freaks out a bit, and then this fire goes up, and now it is the father who's checking under the table, trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. So, Steve like splashes Annie to snap her out of whatever's going on, because she starts talking in Charlie's voice, and Annie doesn't understand what just happened at all. And then it gets to another poorly done cut where Peter's now at school. He's looking around at this light. He looks at his reflection, and then you see that in the trailer, and then he's doing the smiling thing. So Steve, the father, calls up, he gets a call, sorry, and wants to essentially protect Peter at this point. So Annie gets another call, and she gets this other message, but she's starting to really freak out and starts to smash one of her miniatures. And that's when the father walks back in a little bit more calm, which is bizarre. But Annie hands out anyway. So she goes into the room where there's this little notebook which is starting to slowly get filled with drawings. And then we go over to Peter, who hears another loud click. And then there is a sudden, like, moment where he's, like, trying to figure out what's going on, but then he gets his head pulled back. And then manages to get out and blames Annie for trying to choke him out because the hands are Annie's hands, I guess. And we see in the drawings that it's a picture of him getting his eyes marked out. So Annie, thinking that the notebook is connected to her, tries to throw it into the fire, but when she does, she starts to catch on fire. So she immediately puts the book out, and the fire on her goes away as well. We see that Annie watches Peter leave, and then there's like an odd short scene where he just heads out. And then it goes to this, like, upside-down camera for some reason as Annie is moving. It's unnecessary. I think it's a bit unnecessary. As she heads into a room, then she's, like, trying to check in on Joan. She sees that her mat says something, like her entrance mat says something else or something. And she starts to become suspicious. Anyways, Peter gets his name called out. So Joan then sees Peter, she's like yelling at him, and then we get another odd cut. And then is this late in the movie where Annie looks into the god of mischief, which is sort of where this movie starts to end up going now. She looks through some old photos and sees that Joan knew her mother, so their grandmother. Excuse me. And Peter sees another light and stops. So Annie goes to the attic, and then it cuts back to the son, and then back to the mother. It's a little bit annoying that it goes a little bit more back and forth at this point, but whatever. The mother, Annie, sees a dead body and a symbol, so she freaks out, respectably, whatever. So Peter looks around, hearing the clicking, and one of his hands goes up. And this is like during school, so his hand is up, and then the teacher looks at him, and his face is all getting messed up, and then his face smashes against the desk twice, and he starts freaking out. So the father comes to go pick him up, and the father's like crying because he's felt that he's lost control of the situation at hand. Uh, and he wants him to check the body, and the father does eventually scream out. And then the most bizarre thing is like he's like blaming her, like she's like, you desecrated this grave, even though we as an audience don't see that. So I can only take it as that's his assumption. I don't know if that's really the case. Anyways, I don't like this next scene where Steve takes so much time just to move to the next location, and it's really annoying. And she's like, "Oh, come on, you have to burn the book." And then she throws it in, and he catches on fire. And at first, it was really hard to tell if that was fake or real, and it ended up being real afterwards. But it was at this point where Peter wakes up, sees light outside, and Annie, I guess, suddenly now possessed for whatever reason, crawls along the floor. And while Peter is moving along the house, I am thinking to myself, why doesn't he try turning on the lights at any point? That seems like a logical thing to do. But, horror movies got a horror movie. So there's some loud noises and attempts for the big scares. And he does the whole cliche of going, hello. He heads downstairs, and the music's building up. And there are a lot of times before where the music is playing where it didn't feel like it was even necessary. Now it actually finally does for the first time, and he sees the dead body of his burnt father. Peter sees Charlie at the corner, and then does her little knock thing. He runs away, and then Annie gives chase, still being possessed. He heads upstairs, and he finally apologizes. He finally says he's sorry. And he ends up in the attic. He's seeing all these candles around. He sees the picture of himself with the eyes taken out. He tries to wake himself up. And then he starts to look up, and he sees, I don't know how she got up there, but we see that Annie is now up there trying to cut her own neck off faster and faster. And then he sees 3 more ghostly-like bodies, these white figures. And then he ends up jumping out the window from the 2nd floor. And I assume that this killed him. So, from there, you'd think, oh, the movie's just gonna end. Well, no. I'm trying to find where I am in my notes, sorry. So, anyways, the funniest thing in the movie happens, and I'm really glad I went to see this movie as late as I did, because I actually laughed out loud, and I'm ashamed of all you memers out there that didn't meme this yet. I haven't seen any memes yet. I mean, if you're gonna do it for it, why not do it for this? Because I saw the mother float up in the most ridiculous thing, float up to their little treehouse, and it looks stupid. It's so meme-worthy. It's so good. It's so funny. I ended up laughing out loud. It looks so dumb. Oh, man. Anyways, Peter somehow gets up after hearing another clicking noise. He starts to see more white figures, but he's no longer afraid of them. And he ends up going into the tree hut himself. And he sees all these figures, all these people, I guess, with being kneeling to him. He sees this figure of a big Jesus. He sees more candles. He sees two headless bodies. There's a picture of the grandmother there as well. And a figure that ends up being behind him puts a crown on him. And we also hear Joan's voice narrate over this eventually. And then they all start saying, "Hail up Haman, the god we learned about earlier in the movie." And that was Hereditary. And again, I do think that this movie struggles a lot more than what everyone has been saying it has. I think its take into the supernatural is a very uneven transition from what I thought, where I thought this movie was going to go. I thought this was going to be a more dive into actual, I thought it was going to keep within the realm of reality and just focus on the family. I think its dive into the supernatural does take away from the movie. I really truly do think it does. Because it feels like two separate movies, right? And, yeah. It just feels so uneven. And I don't think one performance saves a movie. I don't think that can be the case. I do think that the rest of the family is poorly defined. We barely get to know what Charlie's deal is. I mean, she kind of hits the bucket pretty early. I want to say a few minutes into the movie. So we don't really get to know a lot about her. Peter's character kind of is pretty average at the start, and then his writing starts to get so bizarre, and I think I knew what they were trying to do, but again, I think the transition into it was just very poorly handled and very poorly executed. And I think that's what this movie, again, I think where this movie fails more than succeeds is that transition into the supernatural. I think there's too much of a gap between this whole family dynamic thing that they were going for in the supernatural. I think a movie that actually does this exact thing better is Poltergeist, the original Poltergeist, right? You have a family, you have the daughter who gets sucked in, and you really do feel like that movie does it so good, I think. The original Poltergeist, of the family dynamic, and then, the possessive stuff. And it doesn't, I think, again, it's just a much better example of doing it that way. But I don't think this movie does it that good. I think it falls apart when it tries to tackle that part of the movie. And I think because of that, I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 10. I don't think this movie is as good as everyone has been claiming it to be. I was originally going to give this a 4 out of 10, but I think that I will say that performance does elevate it to 5. But, again, a single performance can only do so much. I don't think it saves the movie from actually falling apart. So that is my review of Hereditary, and it does kind of fall closer to a rant, so that is what it is. Anyways, if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out that link in the description or head you over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.